to the Marketing Nomad Show, the fun pit stop for all things Instagram, where I also share my entrepreneurial journey, some of my lessons, wins, and challenges along the way, so it can inspire you to get started and grow on Instagram as well. Welcome to the Marketing Nomad Show, Kevin. How are we doing today?
Good. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on this morning.
No problem. So today, guys, we have Kevin with us. Kevin is the CEO of Voy Media. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about mindset, about the entrepreneurial journey, and how to not give up. So I personally have heard Kevin's story up until now, and I find it super inspiring. So I'm actually quite excited about today's episode. So Kevin, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this episode, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey up until now, and why are you so passionate about what you do?
Yeah. So hey, thanks for having me on. So my name is Kevin Urrutia. I'm based out of here in New York City. I went to college in upstate New York called Binghamton, and then I spent a few years out in San Francisco working for some tech companies. So like I said, my background's programming, so did a lot of startup stuff back then, and that's kind of like I guess how I was always thought about doing things. I really wanted to work in tech. I really wanted to work in startups. And my life led me to go there because that's sort of what I wanted to pursue. After spending there for a few years, I came back to New York. I started my first company, which is a cleaning company. And then that led me to start two e-commerce brands. And once I did my e-commerce brands, that sort of while building these companies, I was kind of doing a lot of marketing. And then while doing this marketing, that led me to start Voy Media, which is now an advertising agency where we work with mainly e-commerce businesses or like digital products, sort of like things in my space that I understand and have done. So that's kind of how I got into kind of what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So how many companies have you started up until now?
Yeah. So this is a good question. So so basically like there's the companies that like have worked, right? But then there's so much stuff like, at least for me, when I was growing up, I never thought about it as like building a company. I just thought about it as like building things and building projects because that's sort of, for me, I just wanted to learn how to make something online. And I remember when I was in college, I made this website called Viva La College with my brother. And basically, it was kind of like a Reddit for funny stories in college. And we got the domain up, we got the programming up, we got the design up. And I still remember that I tried to program it a little bit. And then I tried to hire somebody on rentacoder.com to make it for me. So this was like, I was like 19 or something. So at least for me, I was just like, oh, this would be very cool if it worked. And I was always like building stuff. And there, I didn't know anything about it, but I learned how to like host a website. I learned how to code, how to hire a coder, how to do web design. And then that kind of led me to learning more about programming myself because at that time, the people that I hired to code it weren't good, or at least I probably wasn't good at explaining what I wanted. So I was like, oh, I just want to build my own version. And that kind of led me to do more like JavaScript and HTML, stuff like that. So that was like one project. And after that, I was working on another website called like Monday.me, which is a question and answer site. I was working on another like Twitter clone. Like I said, I was just like, for me, it was just like building things. But then I guess like real companies that I've started have been much later on, which was like Mate Sailors, like cleaning company, Montum, the outdoor gear company, and then Chester, the luggage company, now Voy Media. So those like four companies that I'm still running right now. But in between there, even between this that succession of companies, I had companies that I've tried that I have failed, and I've kind of just like didn't work, such as a dog company, such as like I was trying to do like an eyebrows company as well, sorry, eyelashes company as well. So a lot of stuff in between, but that's sort of like I said, for me, it's always been like building things, and really why I like to do this because I'm just curious. I'm like, oh, how does this company made? And I just want to know how is that company made, and then I want to go and research. And I'm like, oh, I can do that better. And then I just go try to figure it out. And then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'm like, okay, at least I learned something. And kind of like something that I always tell people, it's like even between each failure or like thing you do, you learn something for the next company. So for e-commerce, right, the first one I did maybe it didn't work, but then I knew how to use Alibaba. I knew to use AliExpress. I knew how to talk to suppliers. Okay, I knew kind of what lingo they wanted. So next time I want to do an e-commerce product, I kind of know, okay, this is probably how I should word it. That way it's easy for them to communicate. Okay, we need to use WeChat. Okay, I have that downloaded already. So that way it's not like this crazy mystery thing. Now it's like, okay, that makes sense. So
That's such an interesting thought. And honestly, I have not heard that before. And I really like the way you called them as projects, just
Yeah.
building things. It
Yeah.
sounds so simple when you say that. And, it doesn't look so daunting or scary, especially when you say it was just me building things. So
Yeah.
I really find that line of thought so interesting. And I kind of want to rewind a little bit and talk about your first company, the first company that you started. It was the cleaning company. What were your struggles with starting your first business?
Yeah. So starting, I guess one of the first things with starting the cleaning company, which is the company's called Maid Sailors, was so I started that when I came back from San Francisco. So basically, at that time in my life, I wanted to leave San Francisco because I wanted to build my own thing. And I kind of, at the moment, I was kind of like in this like weird spot of I was kind of working remotely for that company, kind of wasn't, kind of still working my own thing. So what I struggled with at that time is I didn't want to build my own company while also working for somebody else because I felt that wouldn't be fair to the other company. So I pretty much told them like, hey, I'm just like any job, towards like the end of it, you kind of just like, hey, I'm just like not feeling it. Like I just don't want to end in like bad terms and I really want to pursue this thing. I'm just gonna like quit. And then really for me, once I did that, I got more focus on my maid company. And that really, at least for me, I know some people say like, oh, you should work part-time while doing your business or full-time and work. I couldn't do that. I needed to just be completely focused on the business. That way I knew I can go and try to figure everything out. So at least for me, it was kind of like the beginning was focused, just trying to make sure that this was all I was working on. Um, Second thing, I guess, for the cleaning company was really in the beginning. I came from kind of like one of the biggest struggles that I had for building the stuff before then was I didn't know how to get customers, the marketing of it, right? But during the building of this cleaning company, I learned a lot about SEO. I learned about Google Maps. I learned a lot about how to make content marketing. That really helped me initially get customers and build the business that way. But I think a lot of stuff other than that, it's not just about getting customers. It's also about building a process, building a system, how to hire people, all that stuff that like you kind of don't realize. Like when you're building your own company, you have to learn it. Like yeah, you work at a company and you see somebody hire, but it's much different when it's your own company because now it's like you're the one that's interviewing, you're the one that's going to say yes or no. Versus when you're at a company, it's like you always have a boss that says yes or no, and somehow you think they know, but in reality, they also don't know. So that's kind of like figuring. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. I think that's the biggest lesson that I think, just like as a whole, is that like people listening, your bosses, your managers, they also don't know what's going on. Like it's like because when you're the boss of people, you also don't realize like what's going on either. So it's like everybody's trying to figure it out. I tell people so like you don't realize at that time. Like for me, it's like sometimes you get mad at your managers, your bosses when you're like much younger, and you realize that like they are just like doing what they're trying to think is the best, and you might take it wrong, but they're not doing it from a bad place. I don't think so. But those are some lessons I guess in the beginning, at least for my maid company. A lot of it was really how do I figure out marketing? And I spent a lot of time reading about every way to market: Facebook ads, Google ads, SEO. And I ultimately picked SEO because at that time I didn't have any money. So people were saying, oh, SEO is free. And that was clearly it's not free. But at least for me, I'm like, okay, at least this way, like if I can make content, I just spend my time, right? So in the beginning, you usually have more time than money. And then later on, you have more money than time. So then you can like switch channels.
I really like that you said that in the beginning, you will always have more time than money, and then
Yeah.
eventually it will be more money than time. And it probably just hit me just now, but yes, that is absolutely true. That's
Yeah.
such an interesting, both of all the three struggles that you faced. I think that they're very unique to the kind of business and to someone who's just starting out. Do you feel that as you started more companies, do you feel that the struggles were different, or do you think it just got easier?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. So as you sort of make more success, or at least made sellers, for example, which is doing great, and now we hired a bunch of people. I think I think initially, I think the struggle is still the same, as in you don't know if that idea or product's gonna work. But the thing that I think gets easier is that you can what people call it's like fail faster. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about the basic stuff that you thought initially was the reason why you failed, right? For example, it's, oh, I failed because I didn't have a good name, right? You realize that a name of a product or service doesn't affect the company to fail or not. But what's going to affect it is like if you provide a good product or service. So in the beginning, your first company, I still remember like you spent a month thinking about what's a good name, guys, and it's like, okay, should I use this name? And then you realize like that's irrelevant. And then those are the little things you learn along the way, like, oh, like getting a bank account, that's easy. Getting an LLC, that's easy. Basically, as you sort of get more experience, you can experiment quicker and you kind of know how to get to that end goal faster. That way you can at least try more things. And also it's because you also have a little bit more money. So you can test now. SEO takes a long time. Now, if you have some money, you can say, hey, let me run some paid traffic, Google, Facebook, and see if there's actually customer demand. And you can start sort of like, at least in the beginning, you can sort of like you get better. There's a lot of things you get better at. It's just building a website. The first time it's really hard for most people. The second time, third time, you use Shopify, you use any of these websites, you're like, okay, I know where this thing is. Okay, I know where to go here. It's like all that sort of mental memory just like gets quicker. So I think that's why like I was kind of saying before, it's like all these projects or things you build, they just help you get to your end goal faster. Because the first time, I always tell people, it's they feel so like emotionally attached to this thing. And I'm just like, oh, like people ask me, oh, are you like sad when like things you shut them down? I'm like, no, like I'm not attached to it. I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out if it's gonna work or not, right? I'm attached to just trying to make it work. But yeah, so that's just some things you sort of learn as you sort of build more companies. You get better at like the easy stuff that you realize has no impact on the business. But what gets harder is still like, do you have product market fit? Do people want to buy your stuff? Can you make sales? And then if it works, okay, how do you now bring that to life? I always tell people whenever I do something, I like to at least just build everything out before buying or at least making the product if it's e-commerce. And if it works out well, then you go and start manufacturing. In the beginning, it was the opposite. I was doing what people traditionally do, which is like you upload all this like $100,000 in like inventory, and then you don't realize, oh, are people gonna buy it? So that's sort of like what I'm doing now.
So if I understand correctly, you do say that, testing if your product makes sense and is commercially viable is always a good option
Yeah.
before you invest that amount of time. I think you said 100,000 hours. So is
Yeah.
that what, okay, that I just wanted to clarify that. So, coming to each of the companies that you have successfully built. And then you did talk about how in between there were companies that you did not manage to pull through or they were not successful. How did
Yep.
you manage to move through those failures, or I would say stepping stones? I wouldn't call them failures. So
Yeah.
how did you move through those?
Yeah, so so in between, like when I was doing the outdoor gear company, I saw this other company. I usually get ideas from just like looking at other businesses. I tell people I like reading because I'm like, oh, this is a pretty interesting business. There's like a dog subscription company called BarkBox here in New York. It's already big now. It's almost massive. I think they just got IPO'd. Um, Anyways, I was seeing their business and I was like, oh, this is a pretty interesting business model. Um, and I was like, oh, I kind of want to do something like that. So then that's really where the idea came from. But I was like, oh, I want to do something like that, but like based out of New York City. And I think people always sort of have like, I want to do this, but for that. And I think another thing too, at least for me, the way I think about businesses, it's sometimes people say like, oh, I don't want to do the same exact business as what I saw, right? But I tell people all the time, like every company out here has a competitor, and it's very hard to be super, super unique. And people sometimes get in this like, I don't know why it's a very weird thing, but people get caught into this thing of like, oh, I have to have a very unique idea. And I tell people like, no, you can have a really great business. That's just exactly what's out there. And I tell people all the time, like, look out around you. There's probably in your city 30, 40 coffee shops. There's 30, 40 barbers. There's 30, 40 hair salons. Yes. It's like there's not just one. So people get caught up in like, oh, it got to be one. I'm like, no, you can still make a great company by doing something similar to what other people are doing. You just need to do it better. And I tell people all the time, there's a reason why, let's say you have 20, 30 coffee shops, there's probably five that people really love because those five, they're still coffee shops. So the idea is still coffee, but the way they're doing it, the way they're built, the way they operate it is very unique. And that's where your unique talent still comes in. And that's why you can make it better. So anyways, that's like an idea of like why people are like, oh, I got to come up with a unique idea. I'm like, no, you really don't. Like you can make a great business just seeing something. So I saw BarkBox and I was like, oh, I want to do something like that. And I was like, my twist was going to be, I want to use all like New York local ingredients or like homemade stuff. Um, so that was an interesting thing because ultimately the company failed because we realized that like a company like this, we were bootstrapped, so we didn't have any money. It was, you need to raise funding, and we probably weren't going to raise funding. And the reason why we probably weren't going to raise funding was because I had my other business, and I knew that if you want to raise funding, it's like they make you say like this is the only thing you're going to work on, right? And that's for me. I probably couldn't do that because I was still building my other company. So, but it was a great journey. Talked to a lot of local suppliers. I still remember driving around in Brooklyn, just like talking to these people. I'm like, oh, these treats are cool, and we got to taste dog treats. And I was like, oh, these are all like organic. So like we ate them because they're like basically like there's nothing harmful on them. So that was pretty fun. But really for that was just kind of like we learned a lot. Like I said, we were making custom packaging. We still have the boxes in my mom's house, like the bark box thing of the dog subscription box. And we had like pictures of the photo shoot we did, and we had the website up. I remember, yeah, we had the blog up. Yeah, we just learned a lot, but it ultimately failed just because we couldn't get the unit economics to work. And that's just like a simple exercise of, we found the suppliers we wanted to do, and then we put everything in an Excel sheet and say, okay, like if we want to charge this price, like it's just like not going to be possible. Like those margins were so thin, and we would be losing money every time, and we just couldn't get it to work. But for that one, for example, where we invested more was more time learning what was involved versus money. I think maybe money wise, we probably invested maybe $1,000 getting the boxes, getting some sample treats, some toys, nothing too crazy. So that was an okay investment that we only lost 1,000. The other one that we did was this lashes company where we want to make eyelashes. So eyelashes is a really big thing. And the reason why I like that business was because it's disposable. So you buy them once, and females, girls, or whoever, they can buy them multiple times. So I really like that type of business model where you sell it once and they come back and buy again, because it makes more sense. And also, again, lashes is a very high margin product. So they cost maybe 2-3 cents to make, but then people sell them for like $5.99, $6.99, and then it gets cheaper as you import more. And then you can have eyelashes. There's so many designs, styles. You could see how you can really make a suite of products. And I tell people all the time, you're kind of looking for a business where you can make suites of products. That way you can get customers to buy more, increase the average order value up, and then get them to come back to your store. But anyway, so we built that. We found a supplier in Indonesia, really great supplier. We got custom boxes designed. We had them all made with glitter. So for this company, I was working with another beauty influencer that I knew that wanted to sort of bring this to her space. So for this business, we invested a lot more money. This one, we invested about $10,000 for samples, for products, for just tests. And of course, we were like trying other suppliers as well. Ultimately, this project failed because we just didn't have time. Like we invested the time and money, but we were both, I told her, I was like, hey, like I want to do this, but I just don't have time to like give it my all. Like I think at this time, like I was like Voy Media was coming up, and I was just like, I don't want to like do something where I just like don't. And I think that's so important to like recognize. Like for me, it was like, yes, it was a lot of money for both of us, like 5K each, but it would be better for like the business relationship where you say, hey, yep, this didn't work, let's agree on it, and then let's move on. And we're still friends and we're still talking about, and but like, yeah. So I think sometimes it's like, I tell people like sometimes the money will try to trap you, but really think about it and say like, do you have time? Because like if you had time, you would be really focusing on this, and you putting your energy. But I was like, we're kind of just like, oh, let's think about it this weekend. It's like next weekend. Oh, that's next weekend. It's like, all right, let's stop thinking about it, because then you also are like have this mental energy that's getting used behind your scene, like of like the project that you're working on. So like once you say no, everybody knows how good that feels when you say, okay, woof, I don't have to think about it anymore. Like, yeah. So that's sort of like two projects there.
That makes sense. I think the first one you talked about how the monetary benefits were not working out.
Yeah.
So I think one aspect of knowing when to give up would be to figure out whether it makes sense commercially. So I think
Yeah.
that was one. And then also other factors like your time, the amount of resources that you can put in. And was it easy to walk away from this, from these?
Uh, yeah, I think like if I think it was like towards I think if it was like in the beginning, maybe no, but like towards the end, you kind of know when it's the right time to walk away. It's like a relationship, right? It's like at the end, it's like it's yep, you like, you made the right decision, right? And it's like, yep. And it's like looking like in the moment, maybe it sucked, but I think it's like looking back, you're like, oh, I'm so happy I did that, right? It's like anything, like, oh, I'm so happy I did that. I'm so happy I'm not with that person anymore, right? Stuff like that. You just feel better, right? It's like, but yeah, like there's like a lot of memories and it's fun, and you can like talk about it now, I guess. Yeah. So yeah. But you learn a lot. And I think that's the biggest thing is that like for me, I learned so much about like dog industry and the lash industry. And then when I see products out there now, I'm just like, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember I tried something like that. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I remember, yeah, I remember I tried that thing, and I think that's just like fun sometimes because like when I like, at least for me, when I talk to somebody, be like, oh yeah, I know like how these are things are made, and be like, wait, what, how? I'm like, oh, because of this failed thing, right? So it's like, just like, yeah,
So yeah, that all comes under
yeah,
experience, and I think the part of the entire thing about being an entrepreneur is the journey. So I
yeah,
really can see it on your face as well that you have truly enjoyed every
yeah,
moment of this journey. For those of you who are listening, if you want to see Kevin's face, you can definitely view this entire episode on YouTube as well. I'll put the link in the description box. So feel free to check out the YouTube version of this episode as well. So Kevin, we've talked a little bit about, how did you not give up and when did you know that, it was time to give up? I kind of also want to circle the mindset aspect of the entrepreneurial journey. I think that we face multiple failures on probably an hour basis, if I have to be honest with you. So
yep.
can you talk to us a little bit about the mindset? How did you approach each of these setbacks?
Yeah. I think for an entrepreneur or just like people in general, having a great mindset of like fail. People always say like you want to fail fast, you want to fail quickly. And I'm not this is interesting because I'm not sure if people have heard it or said it before, but for me growing up, this is how I've heard it so many times. And the reason why I heard it was because this is a big mantra in tech communities, in programming community. It says, hey, you want to fail fast, you want to learn quickly. And that's sort of the way I've always thought about it. And for me, it's sort of like manifested where it's like, hey, if I fail fast, what did I learn? Whereas I talk to some of the people, they never really hear that, or like they're kind of like, it's not really a thing. And at least for me, it's sort of like uh, the way I described it was like kind of building projects, software companies, software ideas, showing it out to the world. I think in the beginning, for me, when I was 18 or 19, I was always building stuff and always showing people. And and I think that sort of muscle of showing your work made it really quickly to say, hey, I just want to show you guys this thing. It didn't work out. Next project. You're like, oh, cool. Like you built another thing. Where I think for some people, or at least some friends you talk to, they've never built anything. So then that first thing they build, they're so like guarded of it. So then when they show it to the world, they're scared, and that sort of like helps. That sort of like hinders that fail fast move because now they feel like they showed it to the world, and now they have to make it succeed, and which is a great mindset too, like of making it have to succeed. But then that also clouds your judgment of what's good or bad. So I think it's for me, and I tell people all the time, it's just build in public. Build your stuff out there, show it. Hey guys, I'm working on this thing. I'm going to show you guys my progression. That makes it simpler and easier to move to do things. And at least for me, the reason why I think having a good mindset, at least for me, what it was with this fail fast movement was that in programming, at least for tech, for me, people want to see all the stuff you've done because at least for me at that time, that's what helped you get hired. Like for me, like, hey, if you show people someone like, hey, you made this Twitter clone, you made a Facebook clone, you made an Instagram clone, they're seeing that you have something in you. And that for me was sort of like, hey, if I build more stuff, people are going to hire me. And that's sort of why I was able to get the job out in California, because I was building things in college and just showing people. And at least for me, programmers, we had this thing called GitHub where we would post our projects, our code, and pretty much everything was public. So like people would see how you coded, like all your sloppy comments, all the sloppy stuff. I tell people all the time, like that was scary. But I'm like, hey, like this thing works. Like, and you realize that there's so many different, and I think that's another great thing about programming too, is there's the beauty of the code, which is it's artwork. And also the way you start reeling with code is that there's so many ways to make something work. Whereas sometimes you get caught up you caught up like, hey, this is the only way it works. Like, no, like programming, to make what if I were to make a Twitter clone, if you were to make a Twitter clone, someone else, we would all code it differently, but we can probably all make a Twitter clone. That's like a business. There's three people doing it, but we can still make a business together. So having that mindset of like, hey, my way is my way, and that's fine. I don't It's always great to get advice from other people, to read books because you learn more. But at the end of the day, it's your business. You have to make it the way you want it. And at least for me, it's that's sort of the way I think. But again, the biggest mindset thing for me was I was really caught up into this like, hey, I have to make this like $20 billion company, right? Because that's all you hear about. I gotta make the next Tesla. I gotta make the next like, all this crazy company. You realize that like you can make a company that makes a few $1 million and be happy and have your own employees. And I think sometimes people forget that that's great. Like there's a lot of those people out there in the world. You don't hear about them because they're not sexy or glamorized, but there's a lot of people that just are happy with like I tell people like there's so many people out there that have great companies that you've never heard about, and these guys are probably even happier because like no one talks about them, no one's criticizing them, no one's saying anything about them, right? Whereas like you have guys like Elon, right? Yes, everyone wants to be Elon Musk, but think about how much pressure that is to be the center of attention for everything you do, right? It's a crazy, but I think those are some like mindset shifts that's changed for me. But really, the biggest one that I tell people is start building and start learning, because if you fail, it's okay, because the next company will be even better. You'll learn more, especially if you're doing e-commerce. You learn how to talk to factories, you learn how to do Shopify, how to set up your bank account, how to do refunds. All this stuff now becomes second nature, and that's sort of the muscle memory you're trying to build, because no one can teach you that. And there's so much YouTube videos that you can watch about how to do this, but there's something to be said for just doing it yourself.
I think that definitely resonates so well with me, especially with my own business. I definitely feel that there were so many aspects that
Yeah.
school didn't teach me, YouTube didn't teach me, and I had to figure it out on my own. And the way I figured it out is probably going to be different from the way somebody
Yeah.
else figures it out. Just the way that you talked about, with your programming and how three different people can have different ways to get to the end point. So I definitely kind of like the mindset aspect of it, where you said, it just fail fast, just go
Yeah.
ahead, do it. It's okay if you fail. The goal is to fail fast and get on to the next step, and all of this counts as experience. I feel like we have talked so much in this episode. Kevin, if we were to wrap up this entire episode into three quick actionable steps that my podcast listeners can take right after this episode, what would it be?
Yeah, I think three quick actionable steps would be, number one is like that project or thing you want to build, just go do it. Like I'd say like go do it. It's the best thing. And the next one I would say is if you're thinking about building something and making something, right? I say like definitely be thinking about other business. I always be thinking about competitors. If you have competitors and you see it, that's a great sign for you. So I always say like look for competitors. That means that there's a desire in this market. That means you could sell something to them. Now it's what your unique angle. And number three is actionable step is maybe not so actionable, but like maybe think about yourself and what are your unique traits and abilities that you can bring to your business. And for me, I always tell people it's like because I come with like a programming background, I think about it as like that. That's how I think about things. What's the system, processes, someone else with an art background could be thinking about how do I make this beautiful, how to make this design well. So you have use your unique talent to your ability, and I think you see this more now with like all the Instagram celebrities. They have a talent and they're using it to their advantage of getting millions of followers, and now they're making millions. So like never be yeah, just be like use your unique skills. And I think for just people listening and maybe watching, this is like sort of an overall mindset that I have is it's a quote that I heard from Steve Jobs maybe 20 years ago. It was that like everything around you was created by people no smarter than you. And for me, it's like, oh yeah, like this whole world was created by people like us. So why can't that be me? And that's always the way I thought about things. It's like this widget, this thing that you're holding, this computer, this is somebody. Like this person isn't a crazy genius, but they figured it out. So you can figure it out too, right? Of course, they can be smart, but like that's sort of like the mindset of that I've had is like everything that we've ever lived in this whole world was people like us. And there's a reason why. It's because someone just didn't. Then you can be that person too.
What a fantastic end to this podcast episode, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast episode. Now, can you tell us a little bit about Voy Media? I know we talked a little bit in the
Yeah.
beginning of this podcast episode, but tell us a little bit about Voy Media, and if someone were to require your services, how and where can they find you?
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to talk about Voy Media. Yeah, so like yeah, so Voy Media came out of just kind of like my story of me building stuff. And so Voy Media right now is where we help other founders and marketers market their products on Facebook, Google, or Instagram. And if someone's interested in Voy Media, you can just go to voymedia.com, VOY media.com, or you can always email me, Kevin at voymedia.com. But yeah, like or just contact reach out to me. But for me, I just started it because I just like building things. And I was like, I don't have all the time. I don't have the time in the world to build everything I want, but at least I can help other founders with their ideas and see how they're building it. So that's kind of how that came out of.
Awesome. I'm going to put all of these links in the description box, guys. Feel free to reach out to Voy Media or Kevin if you are interested in, getting your marketing all set for Google, Facebook, and Instagram as well. Now, for those of you listening up until here, thank you so much, guys, for staying tuned. That's a little messy. Thank you so much for staying on up until here. Thank you so much, Kevin. It has been such an amazing episode listening to your journey, your struggles, how you did not give up all through your journey, how you knew when to give up. And your tips are absolutely going to help me and my podcast listeners with our journey as well. So thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Prit. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you guys in my next podcast episode. Talk soon, guys.